Well, thank you all for waiting. And I knew you would wait because we have a very special speaker headed to the stage. The Congressman for the great state of Wyoming, Congresswoman Harriet Hageman, represents the great state of Wyoming in the U.S. House of Representatives. She attended Casper College on a livestock judging scholarship and earned both her bachelor's degree and law degree from the University of Wyoming. A litigator for 34 years, Harriet opened her own law firm in August 2000. She is nationally known for challenging federal overreach and for protecting water rights and users, for exposing federal land and wildlife mismanagement, for protecting private property rights. You all know her. She's made of steel. She's aggressive. She's committed. And she does what she says she's going to do. And she said she'd come here, despite all the weather challenges that you had. Welcome, welcome to the RCAF USA 25th Annual Convention.
Thank you. Thanks, Bill. Thank you, and it is wonderful to be here. It's been quite a challenge to get here. I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning in Wausau, Wisconsin, and the travel has not been ideal, but it worked. It worked, and it's pretty amazing how we can move across this country. Thank you for having me. I don't know how many times I've had the opportunity and the honor to speak here at the RCAF convention, but it's been several. And I just want to kind of give you an update of what's going on in Congress. It really is wonderful to see all of you, and I'm hoping that I can take a little bit of time and actually visit with a few of you after I give my remarks today. One of the things that always amazes me about RCAF is the ability to put on such an incredibly good quality convention with such a limited number of staff and without corporate headquarters in an ivory tower somewhere. Since I visited with you last year, Washington, D.C. has only become a bit crazier, and I imagine so many of you here are well aware of that. The bureaucratic elites have been working tirelessly to take even more of our freedoms and liberties, and while this may seem a bit pessimistic, I will tell you that all hope is not lost. In my 18 months in Congress, I have learned that when we fight back, we can win. One example I want to highlight is something that you were just discussing in your business meeting, and that's natural asset companies. It's a fight that we won against Biden in his effort to try to further limit our access, management, and use to our federal lands. And it's something that I think is very important for you to understand what this administration and what the radical enviros and the UN and other globalists are seeking to do to us. For those of you who have not heard of natural asset companies, I'm actually going to read from the Federal Register notice because, again, it's important that you understand the details. Just in summary, this proposal would have created companies to be listed on the New York Stock Exchange, allowing both domestic and foreign investors, including sovereign nations such as China, Russia, Iran, and Venezuela, to purchase what they refer to as natural assets of our federal lands, such as those lands that are currently managed by the BLM and the U.S. Forest Service. These natural assets include air, wind, grass, pollination, sunshine, carbon, whatever they want to define them to be. And the purpose of these NACs would be to prohibit access, management, and use of these lands for any economic activity such as energy production, mining, oil and gas development, grazing, hiking, etc. And if this scheme had actually come to fruition, people like Bill Gates or Warren Buffett or even foreign nationals would have been able to buy, say, all of the natural assets to the Shoshone National Forest in the state of Wyoming and deny any type of use of those lands. I want to read to you some of the particulars about these natural asset companies. And this was something, they'd state that for purposes of the proposed section, let's see, what do they want to do? The The purpose of the proposed section, a NAC is a corporation whose primary purpose is to actively manage, maintain, restore, and grow the value of natural assets in their production of ecosystem services. In addition, where doing so is consistent with the company's primary purpose, the company will seek to conduct sustainable revenue-generating operations. But the only type of revenue generating operations would be carbon capture. When they do this, they try to value these natural assets, and they pull numbers just straight out of the air. They claim that these natural assets are worth as much as $100 trillion a year, but they don't really say where they get that information, other than the fact that actually these natural assets would be valued by the United Nations. According to the Federal Register notice, the framework would be based on the natural capital accounting standards established in the United Nations System of Environmental Economic Accounting. So it would be the UN that would be determining the value of these natural assets and how they would be bought and sold and traded. What they also say is that this is a natural asset company is a new concept pioneered by the Intrinsic Exchange Group. And they came up with this idea of buying and selling these natural assets. Now, it was very obvious to us when we first learned about this in September that they were trying to keep this under wraps. And there were very few people who actually were aware that the New York Stock Exchange and the SEC was moving forward with this scheme. We found out about it in September when they announced the rule, and they only gave 30 days notice for people to be able to respond and to attempt to fight back against it. We immediately jumped on this, sent a letter to the SEC, and demanded additional time. And by we, I mean my office in Congress, in the House of Representatives, and demanded additional time. We sent a couple of additional letters after that, also asking for more time, because they kept giving us a very short runway, if you will, with it in which to engage in something of this magnitude. And eventually, I led a letter with 31 fellow members of Congress writing to the SEC demanding that they withdraw this proposed rule. We also really rallied the troops, and we were, in a matter of weeks, we were able to get well over 2,000 letters submitted to the SEC in opposition to these NACs. And fortunately, the day before they were supposed to go into effect, we received notice that they were withdrawing the rule. And so why I tell you about this and why I said this in my opening statement here is that if we do fight back, we really can win. Sunshine is the best disinfectant. Transparency and accountability really will work if you attempt to hold these folks, actually hold these people accountable for the decisions that they make. The SEC thought that they could fly this under the radar and nobody would know what was going on. Once we blew it up, that kind of ruined their ability to do that, and they realized that they were not going to be able to go through with this without a huge amount of pushback, including the fact that it violates the Federal Land Policy Management Act. It violates the National Forest Service Act. I mean, it violates so many federal statutes where they would be able to sell these natural assets to people like Bill Gates, Warren Buffett, the Chinese Communist Party. So clearly they knew that if they didn't get this through quickly, it was going to be very difficult for them to do. Now, I want you to think more about, though, what these natural asset companies are for and why they're throwing out numbers of $100 trillion. And this is where I think the much more insidious aspect of these types of ideas come into play. We're $35 trillion in debt in this country, and it's going up every single day massively. The debt is astronomical. We increase it $1 trillion every 6 months. And you've got this Biden administration and the Democrats who absolutely have bought into the idea of modern monetary policy, and they believe that you can just continue to print and spend money and there will be no consequences associated with it. But that's why we're seeing the inflation that we are. It's not coming down despite what the administration might want to tell you. But what I think part of the purpose of these natural asset companies and the purpose of trying to quantify the value of these natural assets on the federal lands is, I think that the Biden administration and the Democrats and the radical environmentalists and the UN and these other organizations want to put that value on the balance sheet of the federal government so that they can continue to borrow more money. I think that this is just another way for them to say, well, we're not going broke. We don't have a debt problem. Look at our debt to GDP ratio. Look at the amount of assets that we have. We have these natural assets, and I think that the very purpose of them was so that they could put them on the balance sheet and then try to collateralize them further so that we could go even further into debt, and you could have economists and you could have the powers that be continue to say, don't worry about the debt. Don't worry, we can sell all of these natural assets to the Chinese Communist Party. In other words, what I think that they intended to do was to take our federal lands and use those as collateral to continue to borrow money from private individuals as well as malign countries such as Russia or Venezuela or Iran that we're making very, very, very wealthy because of our failed energy policies. Now, we won this go-around. We won this particular battle, but don't believe that it has gone away. That this is something that has been in the works for a long, long time. We were able to stop it, but I don't have any belief whatsoever that they're going to walk away from this and not go forward with trying to do something similar, because they've got to try to find a way that they can continue to borrow and spend the way that they've been spending. I'm highlighting this NAC situation because there are many parallels to other fights that I've been in with all of you over the last couple of years. For example, while NACs were an issue that hadn't received much media attention beyond a few industry groups, it was a bureaucratic maneuver that the administration knew could never be passed into law by Congress. And the agency forcing these changes upon us tried to do it as quickly and quietly as possible. We won the fight by mounting a media and PR campaign, which is kind of what we did with the RFID ear tags a couple of years ago. We created awareness, we drove the public comments on it, and we educated our colleagues in Congress on the dangers that the NACs were going to bring to us. As I said, ultimately the SEC and the New York Stock Exchange pulled it, but we have to be ever vigilant to make sure that we don't bring it back. They don't bring it back. Our fight against mandatory EID ear tags has many of the same parallels. It's a fight that we've been in for a long, long time. I know that RCAF has been at the forefront of this and pushing back against mandatory RFID. I really wish that some of our other cattle organizations understood the risks associated with mandatory EID. There was recently an annual cattle meeting in Wyoming of stock growers, and Mark Isley, who is the representative for stock growers and is on the what's the organization? NCBA, yes, the alleged cattle producer representative on NCBA stood up and took me to task for being opposed to mandatory RFID ear tags. Now, one of the things that was interesting to me with what he said was, he said, you know, we don't want mandatory ear tags either. I don't like the idea that they're mandatory, but this is just the lay of the land. This is the way it's going to be, and we got to get on board. Well, I don't know. I thought the government worked for us and not the other way around. It's your industry. And one of the points that he made is he said, look, the packers are only 8%. They only make up 8% of the NCBA. The remainder is the cattle producers, 92%. Well, that's just a matter of mathematics. That isn't because the cattle industry has the most power on the NCBA. It's just that there are very few packers. So if 2 + 2 is 4 and 4 + 4 is 8, pretty soon you're going to be at 92% in terms of the cattle producers when you've only got 4 big packers. It's really not hard to figure out. But the fact is that in doing what I have done for the last 30 years, especially in pushing back against these administrative agencies, as my brother Hugh says, and I've got a nephew laying here with his wife, they came over from Wyoming to be a part of this today. But as my brother Hugh says, is if the agencies, if the laws and regulations actually were carried out the way that they promised they would be, we wouldn't be as opposed to what they are trying to do. But they always have this great idea about how wonderful it is going to be when we have mandatory EID. We're going to have traceability at the snap of a finger. We're never going to have any problems with disease outbreaks. This is going to be the slickest thing since sliced bread. This is all so wonderful and great and everything else. But then all you have to do is look at Ireland. And I'm sure you all talked about that today. You know what happened in Ireland. In the spring of 2022, they adopted an EID mandate, and by August of 2023, they were issuing a slaughter order where they needed to slaughter as many as 41,000 head of cattle, not because of a disease outbreak, but because of global warming. Because of global warming. And if you don't think NACs and the EIDs and the ESG and the DEI and all of the other nonsense that we're dealing with in this country is interrelated, you're not paying attention. This is Marxism at its finest. This is the federal government that wants to control our food supply. They want to control our energy industry. They want to control what we do. They want to control our prosperity. But it's under our Constitution that it is Congress that makes the laws, not the USDA. Not APHIS, not the Forest Service, not Fish and Wildlife. It's us. We're the ones that are accountable to you. We're the ones that have to come back here and meet with, or at least we should. We're the ones who have to come back here and ask for your vote, ask for your support, be accountable to you. It's part of the reason that I do town halls in every county in Wyoming every year, because it's my obligation to make sure that I'm going and talking to my constituents and saying, am I doing what I said I would do? Am I carrying out your interest? Am I representing your interest? And if I'm not, get rid of me. That's the way that our system should work. But we can't get rid of the bureaucrats. And in fact, one of the things that the Biden administration is scrambling to do right now is they're trying to make it so that if Donald Trump is elected in November, he will be unable to change any of the personnel in any of these agencies that are carrying out these radical policies. So they're attempting to hardwire in the same policies because, as we know, personnel is policy. And so this administration is spending their last 6 months writing regulations and executive orders and trying to find ways to embed these radicals into these various agencies so that regardless who is president, they're always going to be looking to control what you do, how you do it. They're always going to continue to try to overregulate despite what the policymaker at the top of the ticket says. To combat what's going on with the EID, I haven't given up on that battle yet. We're going to win this. We're going to win this battle. We won the lawsuit, and then they came back and they tried a couple of different ways to circumvent the rulemaking process, and we kept slapping them upside the head to stop them from doing that, and eventually they had to go through the full APA process. They finally had to go do a rulemaking, which is not what they wanted to do. And there's several reasons as to why they didn't want to do it. One is they're substantially underestimating the cost of what this is going to do to our industry. In 2013, when they first tried to do this in 2013, they estimated that the EID mandate would cost between $1.2 and $1.9 billion. $1.2 to $1.9 billion. This latest rulemaking, they claim that it's going to cost $26.1 million. That's a fairly substantial difference that they ought to be able to explain, right? Well, I'll tell you what they're doing. This latest rule only applies to 11% of the industry for now. It only applies to 11% of the industry for now. So just multiply that by 10. So at a minimum, it's $260 million. They know that. The other thing is that the only thing they pay for is the ear tags themselves. At $26.1 million doesn't include the readers. It doesn't include handling the livestock. It doesn't include the retrofitting of either your own facilities or your sale barn. It doesn't include any of the costs other than the ear tags themselves. That's all it includes, that $26 million. So we know that the cost is going to be substantially higher, but this is incrementalism at its finest. That's what agencies do. So I've got two different mechanisms that I'm continuing to fight this in Congress. First of all, just last week we filed two bills, last Thursday. I think today's Friday. But last Thursday, we filed two bills. One is a continuing, or a Congressional Review Act, CRA, it's a resolution that I have 15 co-sponsors in the House, including two of the most powerful members of committees, Catherine McMorris Rogers and Jason Smith, who's the head of Ways and Means. Both of them have signed on to this Congressional Review Act resolution that would prohibit the USDA APHIS from implementing the rule. So if we can get that passed, we can potentially stop them that way. Cynthia Lummis has introduced it on the Senate side. And then also I introduced a standalone bill just making it so that they cannot go forward with it, that they cannot go forward with the regulations. So we're going to continue fighting this battle. The other way that we're going to try to do the block implementation of the EID ear tags is through an amendment to the Farm Bill. And I am already working on that. I will be very honest with you, though, that when I first debated this issue on the floor of the House last year, it was the chairman of the Ag Committee, the Republican chairman of the Ag Committee, that debated against me. So it is the chairman of the Ag Committee for the United States Congress that is an advocate for EID mandates, and I would assume it's in part because you've got other ag organizations that have capitulated and are willing to go forward to allow the USDA to implement this. But again, we're going to continue fighting back against that. In terms of the Farm Bill, one troubling aspect of the House version of the Farm Bill is that it expands conservation easements. And for those of you who know me, I'm not opposed to conservation easements, but I am opposed to perpetual conservation easements that are tied to that land into perpetuity. I believe it violates the Constitution. I believe it violates the rule against perpetuities. And I do not believe that we should be making land use decisions in 2024 that will still be in effect in 2496. There is a reason that we have always referred to the dead hand from the grave, and by 2496, every single person in this room will be gone, and you should not be dictating land use policy for our descendants, for our children and our grandchildren, and perpetual conservation easements do exactly that. I would also argue that in a state like Wyoming, where 48% of our surface estate is owned by the feds, we already have a perpetual conservation easement over 50% of our lands, and taking the other 50% out of eventual development and production is a bad idea from the standpoint of the economics and the future of our state. You know, I know that these conservation easements can be valuable to people in terms of the tax credits that they may get, and they might get some awfully big checks, but that's a one-time payment. That's a one-time payment. And there's a conservation easement called the Lesby easement by Casper. In 1962, the Game and Fish Department paid $10,000 for that easement, for that conservation easement. That conservation easement today would be worth well over $1 million. So you think of the value that has been taken out of that community because of that perpetual conservation easement on that one piece of property. We know with inflation and the way that land values change and priorities change, that we need to have limits on conservation easements. So we are running a bill to limit conservation easements. I think it's to 50 years. I'd like to do 25. We'll see if we can get that through. It's a heavy lift because this is one of those things that even Republicans have bought into, that this is a great idea for preserving farms and ranches. My fear is that ultimately it's going to cost us our farms and ranches. And I'm adamantly opposed to perpetual conservation easements. I think that they should be time limited. And again, I just think that that's better land use policy. Another thing that we've been trying to do is pull all of the ESG stuff out of the Farm Bill, the environmental social governance. That stuff creeps into everything. And I don't know if any of you watched last week on the Judiciary Committee, we actually had a hearing and we brought in 4 hostile witnesses to testify about what they've been doing. They represent CalPERS, the California pension organization, as well as some NGOs that try to push these companies into this ESG policy, dealing with their carbon footprint and everything. And what they've done is these people didn't realize what we were doing, but ESG violates the antitrust laws because they're price fixing. It's a form of price fixing, and I'll give you an example of what I mean by that. Their 3 priorities are to reduce the carbon footprint and ultimately the output for energy production, air travel, and livestock production. Those are the 3 targets of these NGOs. That's in all their documents. It's in all of their publicized materials. They want to reduce the amount of energy the amount of energy that is produced, and hence the amount of energy that is available to us, oil and gas, coal, anything that's actually reliable and affordable. They want to stop us from air travel. They want to reduce air travel by 19%. Well, take it from someone who lives in airports. The idea that we're going to reduce the availability of air travel by 19% is going to have a devastating impact on people who have to travel, that's what they do. In addition to which, it's none of their damn business. I can travel anywhere I want to. I have a constitutional right. I have the United States Supreme Court has said I have a constitutional right to travel. It's hardwired in me. And the idea that they should be able to dictate that is absurd. And then the third thing, they're going after our food supply. They want us to eat less. This is a group of people who believe in depopulation. They want us to lead miserable lives. They don't want us to have affordable and reliable energy. But keep in mind, that's all price fixing. They're trying to jack up the cost of energy, jack up the cost of air travel, and jack up the cost of food. Well, that's price fixing, and it violates the Sherman Antitrust Act. So all of this ESG stuff, I believe that these people should be criminally and civilly prosecuted for violating our antitrust laws. And when we change administrations this fall and get a different DOJ, I can assure you that that's something that I'm going to push forward with, because it's the only way we're going to stop this nonsense. Just a few more things I want to fill you in on. One of the other things that I want to do with the Farm Bill is I want to make it so that they cannot use eminent domain for transmission lines for wind and solar. We have got to start protecting our resources, our grazing lands, our farmlands. One of the other things that was interesting about this NAC law effort, I forgot to mention this a little bit ago. One of the other things that was very interesting to me about this is that the majority of your federal land is like what we have in Wyoming. It's the Forest Service and the BLM. Those are the 2 by far largest federal landowners in the United States. It's not farm ground. It isn't farm ground. Farm ground is primarily privately owned. Their target is farm ground. So while the NACs, while they refer to this and they describe this as being the federal lands in here, that's what these would apply to, they specifically state their primary target is farm ground. They're going after our food supply. Keep that in mind, and keep in mind that the purpose of the NACs are to stop development and use. So when they target our farm ground, they truly are going directly after our food supply. One other concern that I have with the Farm Bill is it's just so doggone expensive. It's $1.5 trillion. And I know that there are some good things in the Farm Bill, and I haven't decided quite yet what I'm going to do. I know there are some good things in there, but the vast majority of that $1.5 trillion is welfare payments. Now, the fact is, we know we're not going to get some of the farm and ag subsidies that are helpful to our industry. If we don't, that's what they've always done, is they've tied it with the welfare payments. But we have got to start figuring out how we're going to cut federal spending and cut those apron strings that we have. There's an awful lot of subsidies in that bill, and so we need to be looking at it. I don't know what the status of it is right now. It was continued. It was supposed to be reauthorized last year, and they did what's essentially a continuing resolution for a year. It was the only thing that they did that for, so it is up for renewal in September of this year. So I know that they're working on it right now. You know, it is. It's been very interesting to be in Congress. There's a lot that I've learned. I will tell you that I enjoy it very, very much. I'm incredibly honored to represent the state of Wyoming. But when I come to an organization like this, and I know there are people from South Dakota and Nebraska and Montana and Oklahoma and all over in here. And I feel with my background in the ag industry and what I've done in private practice, I feel very strongly that I represent all of you as well. I will continue to fight for the issues that are important to you and to your industry because they're important to my family and to my state. It has been such an honor to represent Wyoming. It has been just really an incredible, I can't believe that it's already been a year and a half, that I've already been back there a year and a half. But coming back to things like this are what really energize me and really, for me, it puts a face to the people that I'm representing. I know what you're doing. I know how hard you work. I know how difficult it is at 2 o'clock in the morning when you're pulling calves in a blizzard and all of the different things that you do to put food on our table. You know, I do want you to know that the people in Washington, D.C. see your industry as one of the most important industries that we have. They recognize what you do. I'm not talking necessarily about the bureaucrats, but the people in Congress, when they think about Wyoming and they think about the West and they think about our cowboys and they think about what you stand for, they think about freedom and they think about liberty, they think about hard work. They think that you're probably the ones that are going to fight back and be the saviors of this country. And I think that too. I think that the people who are in this room are the ones that will ultimately have the ability to push back against so much of the nonsense that comes out of Washington, D.C. You know, we're at an interesting moment in time. We're at a very interesting moment in time. And what happens in November is really going to decide where this country goes. This is an incredibly important election. It's an incredibly important election. There are a lot of very good signs. I think we're going to retake the Senate. I think we're going to keep the House. And I think we're going to take the White House. We're going to have to move if we do that, we're going to have to move very, very, very quickly to try to undo a lot of the terrible things that have been done by the Biden administration. And we're going to have to move very, very, very quickly to put policies in place that are going to last longer than what happened the last time. We are in a fight for the future of this country. Everybody in this room knows it. But you know, throughout history, it's always been a very small number of people who changed the course of history. So we have the ability to do it. We know that we could do it. There are times that the United States has gone through very difficult times, with the Civil War, the World War I, World War II, the Great Depression. But we always came out stronger. And I can tell you that I'm very, very optimistic that the same thing is going to happen this time. We're going to come out stronger on the other end. We've got some real battles and fights ahead of us, but I know when we work together, we're going to be able to win those. I am optimistic, and I hope a year from now when I come back to talk to you guys, we can talk about all the accomplishments of the Trump administration and what we've been able to do. With that, I want to thank you again for having me, and thank you. Sure. I was just told that I'm not done. I also need to let you know that I have done the MCOOL bill. I'm running the MCOOL bill so that we have country of origin labeling. And the thing about my bill is for anybody who violates it, it's a $5,000 per pound fine. So it's got some serious teeth in it, so that we do not have to, so that they will have to actually label our meat for, and I think that it would be huge for our industry. Again, there are some that believe that that's going to knock down the value of your livestock, and I don't believe that for a minute. I just don't believe it for a minute. So I am running the MCOOL bill. I was just asked by Bill if I would take some questions. I'd be happy to take a couple of questions if you have any. Yes, sir. Hi.
On the EID issue, the major cost is the data collection and storage and dissemination of the data they collect in the ID tags. How will that be handled on this 11% deal, and who's going to do the cost of it?
Well, they're only appropriated 26.1, not appropriated. They have identified the cost as $26.1 million, but how they will, to the industry, to you guys, what the cost is going to be to USDA and APHIS, we don't know. They haven't given us that information. That's why I'm trying to defund it, so that they cannot implement it at all by USDA and APHIS. Because they're trying to minimize what the cost of this is, I think that the expectation is that you guys will eat it. Whatever the cost is. Whatever the cost is. It's going to be mandatory. If you don't do it, you don't get your cattle to move across state lines. But, you know, the irony is that it really targets states like Wyoming because we don't have the big packers. So during the life cycle of most of our livestock, they have to cross state lines. So I think that the expectation is you will just eat it. And if they can come up with programs to fund that, I suppose they'll try to do that. I do believe that they were seeking an appropriation of $15 million to try to help to allay some of those costs. But even by their estimates, that's only half of what they need. Yes?
I have a question. From Southeast Colorado, I just got a thing from it's called PERC. They're a public-private partnership, and they have made some groundwater conservation easements that lay over the top of easements. Can you comment on the legality of that, or have you heard of that, and how would that possibly work? I have the information. I'd be happy to send it to you.
Yeah, I'd like to see that. You know, the groundwater law in Colorado is very different than it is in Wyoming. And so I don't know how they would do that. I do know that there has been an effort recently to start doing conservation easements with water rights. And I think you see it more down there than we've seen it in Wyoming. But it would, in Wyoming, I think that you would have a problem with the usage, that you would potentially have an abandonment because you have to use it or lose it. So you have 5 years within which to use that water. And if you don't, then someone who has a later water right would be able to seek an abandonment. So if you were to place a conservation easement on your water right that indicates you're going to do like an in-stream flow or not pump it, then I think that you would be subject to abandonment in Wyoming. But I don't know what they're talking about with that. Okay.
What's your sense of the Congress's mood as to whether they will have the courage to stand up for honest and fair elections and to see it through to the seating of the new president. Are they going to stand up? Or are we going to have a repetition of what we had before?
We're not going to have a repetition of what happened in 2020 for several reasons. And first of all, I want to say we don't want to federalize elections. Elections should be handled at the state level. There's two bills, though, that I have signed on to that I think are important from the standpoint of election integrity. But other than these, I really do believe strongly that running elections is a state issue. I've signed on to Chip Roy's bill that all of these illegal aliens cannot be counted when we redistrict in 2030. So right now, everybody is counted for districting purposes, redistricting purposes. So California and New York this last time actually lost representatives, and Texas and Florida gained because they're losing populations. So that's part of the reason for this 11 million person influx of illegal aliens, is that they want to use those for counting for purposes of redistricting in 2030. So we've got some time to block that, and I think it's one of our highest priorities, is that we need to make it so that you have to be a citizen or you're not counted for redistricting purposes. The other thing is, for you to vote in federal elections, you must have an official ID. So if states don't want to have ID, okay, that's fine. But if for any federal election, you have to show an identification. So those are two things that we're trying to change. As far as elections go, what a lot of people don't realize is that prior to 2020, Republicans had been precluded from being poll watchers for over 40 years. So in the 1980s, there was a judge out of New Jersey who issued a consent decree that prohibited Republicans from being poll watchers because he said that there had been some cheating that had gone on. And every 5 years, the Democrats would go back to that same judge and he would re-up that consent decree. So we didn't have poll watchers for the last 40 years. Fortunately, that guy died. I know I'm not supposed to say it that way, but I like to. He died, and there was an Obama judge that they took that case back to, and the Obama judge said, I am not going to reissue this consent decree. This is a clear violation of the First Amendment. So 2020 was the first time that Republicans had poll watchers across the country, and most significantly in these swing states. And that's when we saw all the shenanigans going on. So we weren't prepared, but the Democrats have had poll watchers during that entire period of time. So they're way ahead in terms of knowing how to cheat and what to do and those sorts of things. The RNC has over 100,000 volunteers that will be involved with the election process this fall. In addition to which, we won 2 ballot initiatives in Wisconsin. We won several lawsuits in Pennsylvania. We're winning lawsuits in Nevada and Arizona. In other words, we're winning the lawsuits right now that require things like signature verification, limiting drop boxes, limiting ballot harvesting, no more Zuckerbucks. There's a lot of things that are changing for this election that allowed them to steal the way that they did in 2020 that we will not. Now, are they going to try to cheat? Yeah, that's what they do. But there's a lot more safeguards in place than what there was in 2020 and prior to that time. I still believe that one of the reasons that the Democrats and Hillary Clinton herself were so incredibly upset about 2016 is that Donald Trump beat the spread. Donald Trump beat the amount of ballots that they already had banked in the box before the election ever even started. And so they realized that his popularity was off the charts because I don't know if it was 10,000 or 30,000 or 70,000 in these various swing states, they already had votes in the can because that's one of the things that they do. And he beat that spread. That's why this election is so important. We've got to do that again.
Brett Kinsey has a question. Our current president of RCAF USA, right out here in the middle.
Okay.
Harriet, thank you so much for being here. I just wanted to ask if you've had a chance to look at the Sustains Act and what you can if you can speak to it, that's the bill that was passed by Feenstra, Johnson, and G.T. Thompson, the first line of which read, "A bill to establish public-private partnerships that in the name of climate smart commodities."
Is that a bill that's already passed?
Yep, it was slipped into an omnibus.
It was slipped into an omnibus. I'm going to have to learn more about it. I'm going to have to learn more about that. Yeah, G.T. Thompson, he's the head of the Ag Committee. Yeah.
I think Mindy Patterson with the Cavalry Group may have talked to you about that in the last couple of weeks. G.T. Thompson.
Yeah, we can explore that. We'll keep
Okay.
going. You're going to be here all night. You're not going home.
So I voted against the omnibus and I voted against the CRs because we've got to stop governing that way. We can't continue to just literally increase spending by 5% every year. We have now spent more than Nancy Pelosi did at the height of COVID. And that is, as I said to Mike Johnson, that is not a good metric. So,
Congresswoman Hageman, this girl Schreiber from Colorado, and we know how money buys influence. And it's my understanding, and I would defer to Brett Kinsey, that they took, I'm going to say $15 million and gave to Farm Journal to push this EID. 40 million? 40 million. Wow, I'm off by 25 million. That's kind of a government speak.
that's what Congress does.
But I know you can't micromanage, but do you realize, you said you went head to head with Mark Isle, is that the name from? Isley. But this is what we're up against. They're buying favor in the country through Farm Journal and our ag media with their budget. I don't think that's a budgeted. How can you micromanage USDA spending money that way to influence implementation of EID?
Well, I agree with you, and really that's propaganda. That is state propaganda, and that's where we are with where we are in government right now. So one of the things that I think that we need to be doing is I think that we need to have a lot more sunset clauses for these various programs that are actually approved by Congress. And what I mean by that is this year we were able to look at Section 702 of FISA. So I'm on the Judiciary Committee. And as you know, Section 702 is what the FBI and DOJ relied upon to spy on the Trump campaign in 2016 when he was running for office. So, but that FISA has a 5-year reauthorization. So every 5 years, and now it's down to 3 years, but every 5 years, Congress has to reauthorize that program or they can't do what they've been doing in terms of the spying. Now, I still voted against it because they refused to include a warrant requirement in the reauthorization. And I think that the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution is quite clear that if they're going to seek my documents and records, they are required to get a search warrant. But setting that aside, we need to be doing that with a lot more programs. And the reason for doing that, I'll give you an example. If Section 230 of the act that the various social media companies rely upon to censor conservatives, that Section 230 gives them immunity. So if they censor you and Facebook takes down one of your posts or YouTube takes down one of your videos, they can't be held liable for that. And that's why before the last election and over COVID, we had such incredible amounts of misinformation and we couldn't get true information out there. If Section 230 had to be reauthorized every 5 years, they would not do that to conservatives because they would know they had to come back before us. So we need to start using those kinds of tools, because what that would do then is, to the extent that we change the program, to the extent that we change the statutes, the regulations that are adopted by the agencies would also become null and void. So it's another way that we can take power away from these agencies by actually reauthorizing and changing the statutory framework in such a way that whatever regulations are in place could go away. So that's one of the ideas that I've had that I'm trying to convince my fellow congressmen that when they put bills in, they need to have sunsets on them so that Congress can actually do its job. And I think that's one of the ways we could do that.
Hello, welcome back to South Dakota. Mike Mueller, Rapid City. I know you have a strong background in constitutional law and serve on committees in Congress in such same way. Federal overreach regarding our forest timber harvest here in the Black Hills. We've got this ear tag thing, this electronic ID. We've got possible eminent domain for Department of Energy coming at us here very shortly to consider. What is your recommendation for our state legislatures, our governors, or attorneys general to tell the federal government to pound sand and enforce the 10th Amendment?
So one of the things that needs to start happening is that all of our governors and state legislators need to be pushing back against the federal government every single time that they come out with one of these federal regulations. You need to start getting in the arena of filing the lawsuits. The enviros do, the NGOs do. They file the lawsuits, the liberal states do. We need to engage in that area. And I know you're thinking, well, you're an attorney, so that you're always going to talk about filing a lawsuit. And I am, because that's where these cases are being won and lost. So your governor and your legislators need to be held accountable for filing lawsuits against these federal agencies. One of the things that I think is critically important, and this is more of a long-term agenda for me, is that I've been fighting administrative and regulatory overreach for the last 25 years, but I've been doing it on a case-by-case basis. So when it's the EPA fighting against their definition of an irrigation ditch being a navigable water of the United States, or fighting the Clinton roadless rule, or fighting USDA on the ear tag mandate. I've been doing that on a case-by-case basis, and we've been winning. And so it's important to do that. But the real power for these administrative agencies is what's called the Administrative Procedure Act. It was adopted in 1946. It's been in place for almost 80 years, and it's never been amended since then. That's the power. That's the source of their power. And the way I refer to that is we've got to cut off the head of the snake. I can go at individual agencies, but what we really need to do is fundamentally change the way these administrative agencies operate and the power that they have. So I'm actually working on a long-term plan to change, to modify and amend the APA to address standing, to address the standard of review, to address statutes of limitations, to address role in rulemaking, all of those things. And then I'm also focusing on specific agencies that we have trouble with and going and looking at standalone bills to rein in their power. That's got to be, I think, that has to be the way that we go about this. That's the way that we're going to win this in the long term, is to change the APA and to change the power and to take the power away from the agencies.
Ellen Reddick from Lawrence County in South Dakota. And we have a situation where South Dakota makes you a resident in one day. So in Spearfish, South Dakota, there's a guy with a KOA. He put stuff on the internet, tells them that he'll provide them with a South Dakota license plate. He gives them his address and a mailbox. He gives them shows them how to get set up to vote. And they had 1,400 votes from his one spot.
Your state, you ought to contact your state, your Secretary of State, and try to get that fixed.
Well, we got to fix it for dang sure, but that's what they're doing now. And
yeah, get a hold of your Secretary of State.
There's quite a bit of it going on right now in South Dakota.
That's what I'd do, is get a hold of the Secretary of State. But thank you all very, very much. Again, I appreciate it.